$3 million disappeared into thin air in historically excluded communities. It's more than a lack of trust, it's a lack of psychological safety.
Hi, my name is Victoria Coker, and I'm the 2024 Interledger Community Ambassador and founder of Black Web Fest. This is a podcast takeover. This series will highlight the guests that are featured in my research project, Unbanked in America, Exploring the Financial Divide, which draws on insights from the 2021 FDIC National Survey of Unbanked and Underbanked Households report. My project explores the cities with the largest unbanked populations, uncovering the systemic issues and personal stories behind the statistics. Today's guest is Dr. LaTanya White, a visionary scholar, practitioner, and the founder of Concept Creative Group. With a career dedicated to advancing racial equity through entrepreneurship, Dr. White has empowered over 10,000 entrepreneurs around the world. Her groundbreaking Dynastic Wealth framework reimagines how we build and sustain wealth in Black communities through evidence-based, equity-centered training. She's a member of the Financial Therapists Association. In this episode, we explore her journey and her bold vision for transforming entrepreneurship and education. Hey, LaTanya, how are you?
I'm good. So, Victoria, can I take you everywhere with me to do that intro because it was so good?
Yeah, I'll go. I'll be right on your back. I know LaTanya, and she's so amazing, and I'm so excited for this interview.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Although I just provided an introduction, I would love for you to share who you are and your experience.
Oh, man. So I guess what really got me to this place, I had been teaching entrepreneurship at a historically Black college in Florida. Go Rattlers. But about 4.5 years into teaching, I was really trying to see, where were all the students? So the university at the time had an enrollment of about 10,000 students, but I only had about 10 or 12. I think the highest enrollment I had in 11 years in an entrepreneurship elective course was probably 20 something students. And I was just trying to figure out, what do we need to do to get more students in this classroom, get access to literally almost free entrepreneurship training. And I recognized that I wasn't speaking the same language as my administrators. And being a Capricorn that I am, I had to prove the point, right? So I ended up in grad school because I needed the research. I needed to be able to say, this is the reason, because I didn't have that language. I was coming at the work from this very heart-centered place, which doesn't always have a place in higher ed, right? So in my doctoral research, I saw this relationship between entrepreneurship and wealth, right? That entrepreneurship it creates this accelerated pathway to wealth. And I was like, this is it. This is the answer. Now we just need to get this into communities that have been historically excluded from building wealth. And what better way to do that than through education? But the way the research panned out, it was more than just what we teach, it's how we teach it. And that's really what got me to the place of developing the framework for Dynastic Wealth and making sure that it really centered the lived experience of Black and brown people who've been historically excluded, people who have experienced financial and money trauma, but don't even know it all the time. So that's really what I look at Dynastic Wealth as, this vehicle for me to help create financial wellness in more communities, and then really being able to package, protect, and pass down the wealth that we're building in so many pathways.
I love your story. I love hearing about it. And when I first heard about Dynastic Wealth, I know we're going to get into it a little later, it just sparked something in me.
Thank you.
When doing mission-driven work, there's always an external force and a reason. Could you share your origin story? Because I think we all kind of have an origin story of why we've gotten into social impact work.
Honestly, it was on my 13th, when I really peel back the layers, it was my 13th birthday. So my birthday is January 2nd, right after Christmas holidays and New Year's. And at the time, my mom was working at the busiest post office in Miami. And this is, of course, this predates Amazon, right? Like it predates overnight shipping. So the holidays were always really, really busy. On my 13th birthday, I spent it by myself because my mom was working. And I had this resentment because, of course, in my infinite teenage wisdom, I knew all of the reasons why she chose not to spend my birthday with me. It literally, Victoria, was not until going through the first year of my doctoral program where we really had to do some self-reflecting when I recognized that it wasn't that she chose that, it's that she didn't have the choice. We didn't have inherited wealth. We didn't have, coffers that we could tap into for different special occasions and things of that nature. And so it humbled me, right? So that's a part of the origin story. And so now what I try to make sure to do is help people see that we don't know all of the story. We don't know anyone's real lived experiences, and we don't know how those experiences impact their relationships with money, why it's hard to talk about money, why I'm terrified of walking into a bank. Like those kinds of things really inform the work that I do.
That's interesting that you could pinpoint it to such a young age and where it kind of started. But obviously it's led to so many great things, right? Good, you were able to kind of turn and flip it around, but also it took you your doctorates, right? To figure that out. So part of the work and research that I started to do was around unbanked and underbanked people. I didn't know before joining Interledger what unbanked meant. So while I'm interviewing people, I'd love to hear what unbanked means to you, just because I think different definitions and terms will help other people have some clarity on what that really means. Because people may know unbanked people or underbanked people or be themselves unbanked and underbanked, but not even know what it is.
Ooh, that's such a rich question. And I'm going to preface my answer with this disclaimer. I am a social scientist at heart. Although I work in, the business field and consulting and all the things, I'm really connected to people in their heart space. And the research method that I use studies the lived experience for people. So my definition of being unbanked is literally it's driven by understanding what has your life experience been that got you to the place where you don't trust financial institutions. So unbanked to me is really about the lack of trust that people have in traditional financial institutions. And then that means I'm going to find this other way around. I'm going to navigate outside of the macro system to move money around to get access to money because I just don't have those more traditional pathways into financial institutions. And then the question becomes, why don't I? Is it because of my citizenship status? Is it because English isn't my first language? Is it because my grandmother still puts money under the mattress? Like it's all of those things. And it's not just we got to put more banks into underserved communities or into communities with zip codes that are under resourced. That's just not the only answer.
Yeah, when doing this research, I found out that there were so many different key reasons why people are unbanked in the United States. And part of it could be you were incarcerated, right?
Yeah.
And so I think people don't really put two and two together to really figure it out. But there's so many different reasons. And like you said, it's not just putting another bank in a area or possibly providing a new fintech company. Sometimes it's a little bit deeper rooted than that. Mm-hmm. So data from the FDIC National Survey of Unbanked and Underbanked Households shows that Black and Brown communities are up to 3 times more unbanked than their white counterparts in the US. From your knowledge and experience, why do you think that is?
Oh my goodness. So from what I've done the research on and really being connected to these communities, this is where that financial trauma, in a lot of cases, it's a trauma that we didn't experience ourselves. So by and large, in historically excluded communities, it's more than a lack of trust. It's a lack of psychological safety when we're talking about financial institutions. So for me, the question is, why don't I feel safe, right? Psychologically safe. Why don't I feel like I can be the best version of myself when I walk into this community branch? And we can date this to the failure of the Freedmen's Bank, 1874, not even 10 years after Juneteenth and the Emancipation Proclamation, but also predating the FDIC. And I think that's really key. The Freedmen's Banks were financial institutions that were initiated by Congress to really help these newly free, formerly enslaved people get access to like financial institutions where they're earning their money and making deposits into these banks. They were scattered around the Southeast. Not 10 years later, $3 million of money, of assets under management, as we say now, were deposited into these banks. And $3 million in 2025 is a lot of money. But $3 million in 1874, right? The National Museum of African American History, like if you go to searchablemuseum.com and just type in Freedmen's Bank, they'll show that 60% of the people who had deposited their $3 million into the Federal Reserve Bank were able to get some recourse when the banks dissolved. So $3 million disappeared into thin air, and there was no recourse. There was no FDIC, right? So a part of that, what is that lack of psychological safety? And even though it hadn't been my own lived experience, there's someone in my lineage. There's an elder, an ancestor had an experience that made them just not trust financial institutions, and somehow or another, because I still see my grandmother put, money in the shoebox under the bed. There's something in me that makes me feel like maybe that's not the path that I should be taking to.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Like there's this lived history that we have, right? And then people are passing it down. It's kind of like how you do storytelling, right? You tell a story before stuff was even documented. And now it goes down from generation to generation. And sometimes you don't even know the root of where this story came from, yes, but you still feel it.
Yeah.
So Interledger is a tech company. It's a foundation, but it also has its own tech and its own protocol. As we discussed, there's different reasons why people are unbanked. Technology is making banking more accessible. But why are people not leveraging these tools?
And this is where we can really talk about the digital divide, right? Dorothy A. Brown, in her book, The Whiteness of Wealth, she really studied wealth creation, wealth accumulation from a tax perspective. And so she studied these pathways to wealth and the interconnectedness of, where you purchase your home, what zip code you purchase your home in, and what school system you feed into. Now, if you happen to purchase your home in a under-resourced area, then the public schools have a lower tax roll. So they have lower resources. They can't pay their teachers as much in a lot of cases. And what does that do to student learning outcomes, right? So now we're looking at, okay, we have these possibly compromised student learning outcomes. What does that mean for that student's potential at the collegiate level? So to getting to your question about technology, we have to look at the system where it's not just about making broadband more accessible in those zip codes. Is there some community program that's going to teach me how to leverage digital assets and technology and not just scrolling, right, on the internet or on social media? So a part of the program, the doctoral program that I was in at Antioch University, we spent our entire first year understanding systems thinking. So while making banking more accessible through technology is one pathway, we cannot forget the human interaction and the human experience that's going to either impede or accelerate my interaction with that technology.
I think that's so important. I think this is kind of why I started this research. Like technology is not the only answer. And when we talk about the digital divide, a lot of people are like, yeah, we need more broadband. But part of digital divide is also the education piece, right? Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of people miss the education piece. And they're just like, okay, more infrastructure instead of education. And we need the two to make stuff happen.
Absolutely.
So could you explain what financial trauma is? Because we discussed it a little bit, we played with it, but we didn't really go deep into it. So this is the place where we kind of talk about that a bit more.
Yeah. Oh, man. So financial trauma, just like any other, just like physical trauma, right? You can, when you think of a TBI, a traumatic brain injury, you can pinpoint there was some collision, there was some friction, there was some conflict. Emotional trauma. Financial trauma is the same, where that tension, the conflict happened around money. And we aren't always able to say, well, this memory, this core memory that I have growing up is financial trauma. And that's why I spend money as soon as I get it. Right. So scarcity mindset, maybe being a product of your parents they did everything they could, but there still was never enough. That is an example of financial trauma in how we then began to relate with money, what we do or don't do with money as adults or in our more mature years. So we think of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. There's also financial stress. I actually was reading a report on employee wellness, and it showed that even high earners, even employees who are generating hundreds of thousands of dollars in six-figure income, they experience financial stress at a rate of around 50%. And financial stress is the number one characteristics that's impeding employee productivity. So financial trauma shows up in so many different ways because maybe I'm making more money than anybody else in my family and everyone's looking at me or expecting me to be the savior. That's a form of financial trauma. If I don't have the tools to draw boundaries, right? Or we can think about athletes and entertainers who are, I think MC Hammer, like dating myself, is a really good example, but there's this kind of survivor's remorse, this guilt that's like, okay, I made it out. I gotta bring everybody with me. That's a form of trauma that's showing up in our financial decisions.
Sheena Allen is now one of the ambassadors and she has experience in fintech. She said that's called the black tax. So when people, feel like they have to do stuff for their family, right? And they're the person who made it out and now they're carrying their family on their back, right?
Yep.
But oftentimes we don't have that financial literacy to even understand we can't afford to do that, right?
Yeah.
And that's tough. And I think people think financial trauma may only impact a small group of people. So it's interesting to hear like 50% of people who are making so much money are also impacted, right? So through your doctoral research, you're working towards becoming a certified financial trauma therapist, right?
Yes.
What services do financial trauma therapists offer to help individuals heal from financial trauma?
So looking at other proven therapeutic models, even as something as basic or as foundational as journaling and doing reflective journaling. And that's where we get to really get to the origin point of how did this story that I'm walking through the world with, that I'm making these decisions with, how did that become the narrative? So this reflective journaling, that's one pathway. And then there also in other examples, it may be where sometimes hypnosis might be a method. It really depends on the therapist, the modes and modalities that they found to be most impactful for their clients. I think, again, because of my background as a social scientist, the traditional, when you see any TV show and someone's talking to their therapist, they're kind of laid out on the couch. That's really the kind of vulnerability and safe spaces that I plan to create for my clients as I'm working with them and getting them on this path to financial wellness after we've, named and reconciled what some of those traumatic experiences might have been.
interesting hypnosis. Like,
it depends, right? Listen, there's something for everybody because financial therapists come to the space from different backgrounds. There are some folks who are social workers by trade, some who are psychiatrists by trade. So it's not just you have to meet this profile. You come to the work with whatever community of practice you've been in, and you want to add a little bit more depth to your clients that you're finding who specifically are having trouble around money and finances.
so if people lack access to financial trauma therapists, because obviously there may be a cost, I don't know if it's covered by insurance, who knows? What are some ways they can heal from the trauma?
One of the things that I have found, as you probably notice, whenever I open my mouth, I'm always talking about like the wealth experience. And for me, it's about getting to the root of the issue or getting back to the point of origin. So one of the things that I work with my clients on is really looking at like understanding the wealth distribution story of America, right? And so that's learning. But then the application of that as a therapeutic model is now taking what you've learned and looking at your own life and lived experience, looking at what's happened in your family. How have things like redlining impacted your parents' childhood? How have things like being excluded from getting the GI Bill benefits, what did that mean for your grandfather or your grandmother? And then how has that shown up in your life? So that's one of the ways that I always recommend that you do your own, basically your own documentary, right? You create your own documentary around wealth and money stories in your family and in your lived experience.
Money stories. You have to create your own money stories. It's kind of like creating like a family tree, a genealogy of money in your family.
That's absolutely it.
Okay, everybody, you got to do that. Your first homework is just to do that. So create your own money stories. So I'm in awe with you. I love your framework. The first time you explained it to me, I was like, this is great. And I've been like an advocate of you ever since. Can you share what dynastic wealth means and how you're using this framework to empower marginalized communities?
Yeah, thank you so much. You know, that means so much to me. So part of the research that I did on my doctoral journey was really trying to figure out, well, you know, if generational wealth is the answer, because most of us are looking at generational wealth, or rather, most of us understand generational wealth as only these financial assets, these very tangible items that you can deposit into a bank, right? You can walk into a financial institution. And so the question that I asked myself, well, if money was the only answer, how is it that after over 100 years and 200 ancestors or so, has the Rockefeller family remained among America's 25 wealthiest families if it's only about money? Because we're talking about human beings, complex, complicated beings. How is that? And as I really began to do more research, I discovered that it's more than just money. It's just the marginalized communities have not been told this part of the story. And so that's the mantle that I took up with dynastic wealth and these 5 forms of wealth that dynastic families are building. So for context, a family reaches dynastic status only after the 3rd consecutive generation of control. So if we're talking about, okay, I've got this financial trauma, I don't have any trust for the financial services industry, I'm not making enough money to understand how to save, to, you know, be in a position to purchase a home, like all of these things. So with dynastic wealth, it's about let's really situate who you are. Let's really operationalize and document what's your vision for wealth. And not just you, Victoria, but you and your family, because that's the key. It's really about how do we extend what you know about money and wealth, what your cousins, your sisters and brothers, what they're interested in learning about money and wealth, and building a shared vision for that. So the dynastic wealth framework brings all of those things together. It brings together this understanding of how you're probably walking through the world with some financial trauma that's impeding your ability to build and create wealth. It brings in research on what dynastic families are doing, how they are envisioning spiritual wealth. So this is another form of wealth. They're documenting their family identity and their family values. They are recording the wealth of knowledge, right? In our families, we're like, well, who made the potato salad, right? And it's that recipe that we want to honor and treasure and replicate. So it's literally comes down to family traditions and family recipes as you're recording the wealth of knowledge. There's investing in intellectual wealth where as a family, we're making this concerted effort to invest in you, becoming the best version of yourself, and then relational wealth, opening the door for you, like ensuring that you feel psychologically safe in environments that you may not be comfortable in otherwise. So these 5 forms of wealth are really what create the family dynasty. And what dynastic wealth does is it teaches all of that from the lens of there is a story, there is a narrative, there is a lived experience that deserves to be centered and should be honored in the way that you're being taught and socialized around money and wealth.
It takes the money stories to another level, right? So
Yep.
first you're creating these money stories, which is a part of the healing, but then you're creating a new framework as a family collectively. And after you talked about it, I definitely have told my family about it. I'm like, this is the stuff you got to do. Look at the whole diagram and the framework. Do they
Yes.
listen? I don't really know, but it just makes you start to think about those things. And I think that's really important as a family and have those conversations, because I think, as you kind of mentioned, it's like people don't want to talk about money, right? People don't want to say how much they make. It's a lot of fear there, but having those open conversations, I think it pulls people in and it allows them to kind of like build together and build trust as a family. I know you're working on a few new projects. What can you share about them?
Thank you for that. So what I'm most excited about, because remember I shared, I really started this journey from being an entrepreneurship educator. And it was really about helping founders and the technical assistance programs they're going to make the connection between entrepreneurship, economic prosperity, and family wealth. So what I'm really, really super excited about is positioning dynastic wealth as this, and it's unfortunate, but the mental health status of entrepreneurs today, especially entrepreneurs from Black and Brown communities, there's so much pressure from every direction. So what I'm really honored to be able to do is use dynastic wealth as this vehicle for entrepreneurs to be able to relieve, quote, some of that financial stress, to give them the tools, because financial education and personal finance literacy is embedded in the framework for dynastic wealth. I mean, we're getting down to questions about how much do you pay yourself as the CEO in your business? And if you're a solo founder, you should be paid twice, right? And so how that impacts the way that you're able to then show up not only for your customers, but your family and your community. So dynastic wealth financial wellness training is something I'm really excited about. And what it does, Victoria, is it leads with the asset-based narrative as opposed to the deficit-based, trauma-based language that I had been using, because it was just so glaring to me that we need to acknowledge this. And now that I think I've done a little bit of awareness, I can get to, okay, here we go. Here is the toolkit. Here is the pathway to financial wellness born out of past financial trauma.
You're taking everything, bundling it together, and
Yes.
everyone can get this, learn where you are. You can start from where you
Yes.
are and grow. So I'm super excited, and I can't wait for it to all be available for everybody. I know some pieces are there.
Yes.
If people want to learn more about your work, where can they find you?
So dynasticwealth.online, there's actually a video library on my website, dynasticwealth.online. I'm most active on LinkedIn, Dr. LaTanya White on LinkedIn, or Meet Dr. White on Instagram.
Great. Everybody follow this woman if you know what's good for you. Dr. LaTanya White, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for tuning into this episode of the Future Money Podcast. We hope you found our conversation with Dr. LaTanya White both enlightening and empowering. Her work at the intersection of entrepreneurship, racial equity, and wealth building offers a bold vision for closing the racial wealth gap and transforming the way we support underserved communities. From the Dynastic Wealth framework to her evidence-based approach to entrepreneurship education, Dr. White is challenging the status quo and creating space for lasting economic change. Until next time, let's keep reimagining a more just and inclusive financial future. Thanks again for listening.